Hello and welcome to Chapter 7 of our course on ISO 8583, Transaction Processing from Terminal to Issuer. This chapter is called End-to-End Online PIN Transactions, and we are going to look at authorization messages with online PIN. In this first video, we are going to look at the general concept of online PIN. The first step for using online PIN is for the PIN to be captured. This can be done on a POS device by typing the PIN on a PIN entry device, or PED. And it can also be done on an ATM. The very high-level concept of online PIN is that the PIN, which is captured on the left-hand side of this picture, is carried with the authorization or financial message all the way to the card issuer. And the card issuer verifies this PIN. Although it serves the same purpose, to verify the cardholder's identity, online PIN is very different from the concept of offline PIN, where the PIN is verified by your chip card on behalf of the card issuer, directly at the point of sale, and does not need to transit to the issuer. So the concept of online PIN is quite simple, but the implementation is very complicated. The main reasons for this complication are the PCI DSS requirements, which essentially say that you can't have the PAN and the PIN in readable format in the same place, because that would be too big a security risk. Just like when you receive a credit card in the post, and the PIN has to come in a different envelope on a different day. With regards to online PIN, those are the high-level requirements. Requirement 2A states that cardholder PINs shall be processed in accordance with approved standards. All cardholder PINs processed online must be encrypted and decrypted using an approved cryptographic technique that provides a level of security compliant with international and industry standards. Any cryptographic technique implemented meets or exceeds the cryptographic strength of triple-DES encryption algorithm using double-length keys. And requirement 2-3 states that online PINs must be encrypted using an algorithm and key size that is specified in ISO 9564. Therefore, our simple diagram from before is made more complicated. When the PIN is captured on the PIN entry device, it is encrypted. And it's this encrypted value that transits all the way to the card issuer. When the card issuer receives the encrypted value, it uses an HSM, a host or hardware security module, to decrypt it and to verify it in a secure fashion. This is the same kind of device as we've seen for EMV transactions. It can actually be the same HSM that performs EMV and PIN operations. Now let's zoom out of our simplified picture and see what happens with the more realistic global picture. The PIN is encrypted by the terminal or ATM and transits through a series of networks, potentially halfway around the world, to reach the card issuer. The obvious question here is, how is the issuer supposed to know the key to decrypt it? It is not technically possible for each card issuer to be aware of all the keys used for PIN encryption by all the terminals and ATMs in the world. There are millions of terminals and thousands of card issuers. That's just too big a matrix. Besides, it would be unsafe to share all those keys among the different actors. The more people know a secret key, the higher the chances that it gets in the wrong hands, and then the whole system is compromised. And it would be unsafe for all the terminals and ATMs in the world to use the same key, for basically the same reasons. The solution that was chosen consists in securing each connection individually, say between the acquirer and the payment network, and between the payment network and the issuer, and so on, and to convert the encrypted PIN at each node with a different key. This process is called key translation. So you essentially get point-to-point encryption from beginning to end. An area where the same key can be used to encrypt or decrypt an online PIN block is a PIN zone. If we go back to a simplified picture, there is one zone between the terminal and the acquirer, a different zone inside the acquirer's host, another one between the acquirer and the payment network, yet another one inside the payment network system, and the last one between the payment network and the issuer. Again, this is a simplified picture. The more actors you add to it, the more zones you need. And there can be zones inside those systems. For example, let's look at what might happen inside an acquirer's host. There is one zone on the left side for messages coming from terminals. There is one zone inside the host, and there is a different zone for each interface on the right. And an HSM, or more likely an estate of several HSMs, manages those zones. So when an encrypted pin comes with a terminal message, as part of the message conversion process, a call is made to the HSM to translate the pin. And the message that comes out of the conversion process will contain an online pin encrypted under the key for our zone B. That means that the new message can go anywhere inside the host, and the different internal processes will know how to handle this encrypted online pin because they share the same pin encryption key and have access to the same HSM. When a message goes out of the host through a payment network interface, it leaves the zone, and therefore the encrypted online pin has to be translated again. The pin encryption key on the interface with the payment network is shared between the acquirer host and the payment network. This is a different zone. So, as part of this other message conversion process, a call is made to the HSM to translate the online pin from our zone B to our zone C. Each zone is protected by a key. The zone with the terminal is protected by a terminal pin key, or TPK. All the other zones are protected by a zone pin key, or ZPK. So just to restate it, a key translation of an online pin is the conversion of an encrypted online pin block from one pin key to another. This is always done by an HSM. The HSM simply decrypts the original pin block with the first key and re-encrypts the pin block with the second key. This is done inside the HSM in a secure fashion. Now let's start looking at how this is implemented on the technical level. And let's begin with another PCI DSS requirement. Requirement 2-2 states that online pin translation must only occur using one of the allowed key management methods: duckput, fixed key, or master key session key. We will explain those methods in a few minutes in this lesson, and we will give full examples of those methods in the next lesson. But first, let's take a little detour and talk about the kind of keys that are used for pin operations. Most systems use the triple DES algorithm for online pin operations, and some systems use AES. Triple DES keys come as double length, which are 16-byte or 128-bit long, and triple length, which are 24-byte or 192-bit long. Here is an example of a double-length triple DES key. And here is an example of a triple-length triple DES key. So that's the kind of key that you can expect to find when you deal with online pin. An important concept to introduce when it comes to keys is the key checksum value, or KCV. KCVs are used to compare keys without knowing their actual values, and they are created by encrypting a zero block with the key. Let's go back to our example of a double-length triple DES key. This is a zero block for triple DES. It's made of 8 bytes. If we do a triple DES encryption on that block with that key, we get this result. The key checksum value is typically truncated after 2 or 3 bytes. So our key has a 2-byte KCV of 1B85 and a 3-byte KCV of 1B8589. The KCV is a good shorthand for a key. With a 2-byte KCV, there is only one chance in more than 65,000 that two different keys have the same KCV. And with a 3-byte KCV, there is only one chance in more than 16 millions that two different keys have the same KCV. To put it simply, it is highly unlikely that you will come across two different keys that have the same 3-byte KCV in your entire life even if you work with keys every day. And that's why designating a key by its KCV is a good idea. You will see throughout this chapter that we use the concept of KCV a lot. This course on online PIN would not be complete if we did not talk about the way HSMs use keys, because they add a level of complexity that you need to be aware of. HSMs do not use keys directly. Instead, they are loaded with a local master key, commonly called LMK, which is the only key actually stored in the HSM, and which is unique to a set of HSMs that are part of the same estate. There is a whole procedure with smart cards, passwords, and multiple agents to ensure that the LMK stays secret and is only known by the HSMs. And every operational key is encrypted under that LMK. This adds a layer of security, as the use of those secret keys also requires access to a specific set of HSMs, which are in a secure environment with no external access. So the keys defined for an interface are always encrypted under that LMK. Let's go back to our example of the double-length triple-DES key with KCV 1B8589, and let's say that the key is used for PIN encryption. This is the actual value of the key, which is usually referred to as the cleartext value. But the value that the operator will set on the interface is the key value encrypted under the LMK, as we are showing now. Note that the KCV stays unchanged to identify the underlying key. And it's really useful that we have this KCV, because if you use different systems with different HSMs, you can always recognize that you are using the correct key. With this little example, you can see how, even if an operator is corrupt and steals a key, there is nothing that can be done with the key without the HSM that has the right LMK. But it does add yet another level of complexity to our overall system. A PIN value is never encrypted on its own. It's always placed in a PIN block, and the allowed formats are specified by PCI DSS. The requirement is as follows. For online interchange transactions, pins must be only encrypted using ISO 9564-1 PIN block formats 0, 1, 3, or 4. Format 2 must be used for pins that are submitted from the IC card reader to the IC card. So format 2 is for offline PIN, and the other ones can be used for online PIN. PIN blocks are ways to pack the PIN into a known block format, to ensure that the block is of the correct size for the encryption algorithm. Typically, formats 0, 1, and 3 are for triple-DES on 64 bits or 8 bytes, and format 4 is for AES on 128 bits or 16 bytes. And the PIN blocks ensure that the PIN value cannot be retrieved without the PAN, except format 1. So if you get your hands on an encrypted PIN block, and somehow manage to get the encryption key, you cannot retrieve the PIN unless you know the PAN for the transaction, except with format 1. Let's look at that in more details. The simplest block is with format 0. The plaintext PIN block is formatted like this, with the leading 0 indicating format 0, 4 being the length of the PIN value, 1, 2, 3, 4 being the actual PIN value, and the rest are padding with F to form an 8-byte block. This plaintext PIN block is XORed with an account field. The account field always starts with 4 zeros, which are followed by the rightmost 12 digits of the PAN, excluding the check digit. So if we start from this PAN, remove the last digit, which is the check digit, and count 12 digits from the right, it gives us this account field. And the result of the XOR operation is this PIN block, which will be encrypted and re-encrypted by the different systems until it reaches the card issuer. When it comes to online PIN management, there are differences between host-to-host and terminal-to-host protocols and interfaces. Host-to-host connections, for example a quire-to-payment network, are one-to-one connections, and the hosts are in a secure environment. So key management is quite simple. With terminal-to-host connections, on the other hand, a single host can accept connections from thousands of terminals. We're talking about many-to-one connections. And terminals are meant to be in the field, where the communication line can be insecure and the environment itself is less secure. So key management is more complex. Let's start with terminal-to-host online pin management. There are essentially two methods that are being used with terminals. Those are master session and duckput. Let's start with master session. Before leaving the acquirer's premises, before being given to a merchant, the terminal is loaded with a master key, which is a key encryption key. After it starts its useful life, when it's operated, the terminal makes key exchange requests to the host. This happens at startup and at configured intervals, which can be after reconciliation or after a certain number of transactions have been processed. This is really up to the acquirer. And the host responds with a session key, which is encrypted under the master key. The terminal therefore uses the master key to decrypt this session key and to make it the current PIN encryption key. When a transaction with online PIN takes place, the PIN entered by the cardholder is encrypted using the session key and is sent to the host for translation. And that's the essence of master session. The other method used with terminals is duckput. Duckput means derive a unique key per transaction. It uses a two-step derivation process to solve the main shortcoming of master session, which is that the host needs to keep track of the session key for each terminal in the field. It is not rare that terminals and hosts get out of sync with master session and that terminals need to be resynced. The way duckput works is that one key is created by the acquirer for a range of terminals. That key is named the base derivation key, or BDK. And you will see that it is the only key that the acquirer needs to keep a record of. Before leaving the acquirer's premises, before they are given to merchants, a unique key is derived from the BDK for each terminal. That terminal key is named the initial PIN encryption key, or IPEC, and it is loaded in the terminal during a process called key injection. After it starts its useful life, when it's operated, the terminal derives a new key from the IPEC key every time it encrypts an online PIN block, and it provides all the information to the host to perform the derivation from the base derivation key that the acquirer kept a record of. So the duckput key injection process works like this. The acquirer has a base derivation key to be used on many terminals. An initial key serial number is generated for each terminal and is loaded inside the terminal. The acquirer uses the base derivation key and the initial key serial number to derive an initial PIN encryption key, IPEC, which is also loaded inside the terminal. And the terminal encryption counter starts with 0. The values in the middle can be forgotten by the acquirer, and the terminal is ready to go in the field. When a transaction with online PIN takes place, when the cardholder enters their PIN on the PIN pad, the terminal encryption counter is incremented by 1. The terminal retrieves the initial PIN encryption key, IPEC, which was injected earlier, and derives a unique PIN encryption key. You can see that the PIN encryption key is unique because the encryption counter is different for every transaction. Having a unique encryption key for each transaction is a lot more secure than reusing the same encryption key for a number of transactions, like with master session. When the terminal generates the authorization request message, it inserts the PIN in an online PIN block which is encrypted with this unique PIN encryption key. And it also provides all the information that the acquirer will need to generate this unique PIN encryption key, which means that it also sends the initial key serial number and the current value of the encryption counter. The acquirer will just need to give all that, plus the base derivation key, to the HSM during the key translation process. And that's how duckput works. We will go through a worked example in the next lesson. Let's now turn to host, which really covers the rest of our overall picture. Hosts either use a fixed key for PIN encryption, or use a master session system with a key encryption key and a PIN encryption key. A difference with terminal encryption is that the two hosts may be operated by two different parties. With terminal to host, the acquirer typically owns the terminals, or at least has physical access to them before they go live, so the initial synchronization of keys can be done in a secure environment. With host to host, this is not always the case. A payment network might be connecting to a card issuer in a different country. So the fixed PIN encryption key or the key encryption key must be exchanged over a different channel for security purposes. This can be done by secure email or with the key value being printed on different pieces of paper which are sent separately via courier by one party to the other, or by some other means. In terms of terminology, you will see that there are different names and acronyms that may point to a same key. For example, HSM vendors and payment switch vendors have different ways to name keys. The key encryption key, which is the key that is set up at an interface so that the PIN encryption keys can be exchanged, is sometimes called KEK for key encryption key, and sometimes called ZMK for zone master key. More confusing is the actual PIN encryption key. It is sometimes just called PEK for PIN encryption key, sometimes called ZPK for zone PIN key, or it has a variety of acronyms to point to a working key, like PWK for PIN working key, or AWK for acquirer working key, or IWK for issuer working key. Those last distinctions come from the fact that a different PIN encryption key can be used on the same interface for outbound PIN blocks and for inbound PIN blocks. When a key encryption key is involved, a process of dynamic key exchange, or DKE, is at play. We have a whole lesson dedicated to it at the end of this chapter, but for the general concept, just know that dynamic key exchange is always done with network management messages, because this is a point-to-point process between two interfaces, not for the whole system. Typically, either one host makes a request for a new PIN key to the other host, and this one replies with a new PIN key that it sends encrypted under the key encryption key. Or it's the other way around, with one host indicating to the other one that it generated a new PIN key, and sending the new PIN key encrypted under the key encryption key to the other side. And the other host simply acknowledges the new PIN key. Authorization and financial request messages are just sent with their online PIN blocks encrypted under the PIN encryption key. Sometimes an additional field is sent with security-related control information to ensure that the receiver uses the right PIN encryption key, but this depends on the protocol. This concludes this lesson on the general concept of online PIN. Thank you for watching it.